Tonight's top political stories are like a newscast from the end times or some terrible dystopian movie. Today, the next American president was ordered by a federal judge to sit for a 4-hour deposition next week in a defamation case Donald Trump brought against ABC News earlier this year related to Donald Trump being found liable for sexual abuse by a civil jury. The order, issued in federal district court in Miami, that Donald Trump's deposition will, quote, be limited to 4 hours and shall take place in person in this district. Trump's counsel shall schedule the deposition to take place the week of December 16th, 2024. With Election Day now behind us, there is no reason for any further delay. So, Trump could take 4 hours out of his very busy schedule of putting together the most unqualified cabinet in history to sit for a deposition next week. It's been 2 weeks since Donald Trump, a convicted felon, nominated Charles Kushner, also a convicted felon, as the United States ambassador to France. Ivanka Trump's father-in-law was pardoned by Trump in December of 2020. A day later, Donald Trump announced that he was also adding Tiffany Trump's father-in-law to his administration to serve as his senior advisor for Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. Mossad Boulos joined Trump in meetings with the Arab American community in Dearborn, Michigan, in the days leading up to the 2024 election. At the time of Trump's announcement, the Wall Street Journal described Mossad Boulos this way, quote, Lebanese-born billionaire and father-in-law to his daughter Tiffany. But as the New York Times reports, only 2 of those descriptions are true. The Times reports, quote, there is no indication in corporate documents that Mr. Boulos is a man of significant wealth as a result of his businesses. The truck dealership is valued at about $865,000 at its current share price. Mr. Boulos' stake, according to securities filings, is worth $1.53. As for Boulos Enterprises, the company that has been called his family business in the Financial Times and elsewhere, a company officer there said it is owned by an unrelated Boulos family. The confusion over Mr. Boulos' background and his failure for years to clear up misunderstandings until questioned this week by the Times raises questions about how thoroughly Mr. Trump's team vetted his nominees. I would say not at all, which brings us to another nominee, Robert Kennedy Jr. Here's how Senator Elizabeth Warren announced today's news.
Say goodbye to your smile and say hello to polio. You know, I would laugh if it weren't so scary. Donald Trump just picked RFK Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. This is a man who wants to stop kids from getting their polio and measles shots. He's actually welcoming a return to polio, a disease we nearly eradicated. But it doesn't stop there. RFK Jr. also doesn't believe fluoride should be in your water, and that's what keeps your teeth from rotting. You can't make this stuff up.
The New York Times reports, quote, the lawyer helping Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pick federal health officials for the incoming Trump administration has petitioned the government to revoke its approval of the polio vaccine. Mr. Kennedy, President-elect Donald J. Trump's choice for health secretary, has said that he does not want to take away access to any vaccines, but as he prepares for his confirmation hearing and plans a fresh health agenda, his continuing close partnership with Mr. Siri suggests that vaccine policy will be under sharp scrutiny. At the Trump transition headquarters in Florida, Mr. Siri has joined Mr. Kennedy in questioning and choosing candidates for top health positions, according to someone who observed the interactions but insisted on anonymity to disclose private conversations. They have asked candidates about their views of vaccines, the person said. In a statement to NBC News, Mitch McConnell, an actual polio survivor and Republican, said, quote, the polio vaccine has saved millions of lives and held out the promise of eradicating a terrible disease. Efforts to undermine public confidence in proven cures are not just uninformed, they're dangerous. Don't remember him saying that during COVID. Donald Trump's choice to run a federal agency that administers health, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act insurance marketplace is Dr. Mehmet Oz, who owned up to $33.7 million in stock in health insurance companies who provide insurance under Medicare Advantage. USA Today reports, quote, He also owned between 5.8 million and 26.7 million in Amazon, and between 1.6 million and 6.3 million in Microsoft, two major technology providers for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It's the agency he would run. The incoming team is like a murderer's row of the worst people. It's hard to watch. And we're not even on day one of the next 4 years. Today, the White House announced Vice President Harris will be speaking to young leaders next week in Maryland. The White House says the vice president's speech will, quote, focus on the importance of sustained civic engagement moving forward and the ongoing fight for the future. That resonated with me because teachers and professors like myself, a professor at Morgan State University, are tasked to do this every day since the election with their students. It's been 9 years and counting that Donald Trump has been in all of our lives. And that's bad enough for an older adult like myself. But at least we lived through the before times, the days when a presidential scandal was wearing a tan suit in August. But for today's high school and college students, kids who are like 14, 18, 21 years old, college freshmen, Trump has dominated American politics for half or possibly most of their lives. So now, for some insight and solidarity about how to shape the future on the precipice of a very ugly future administration, we're joined by an all-professor, all-star panel. Dr. Kenesha Grant, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University. She's the author of The Great Migration and the Democratic Party, Black Voters, and the Realignment of American Politics in the 20th Century. And Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster, MSNBC political analyst, and lecturer at the University of Miami. So we're going to start with Professor Grant. And I'm going to ask this question not just because we're both HBCU professors, but because I'm going to share an honest anecdote from my goddaughter. My goddaughter reached out to me after the election and said, is it still going to be safe? Will Howard still exist when I graduate from high school, and will it be safe? And to hear that from a 14-year-old just devastated me, because she was politically aware enough to know that, hey, this is a dangerous environment we're in. Will HBCUs even exist? Kenesha, when you talk to your students, what kinds of questions are they asking about their future, knowing that they're about to go through another 4 years at least of a right-wing Trump administration?
I'm so sorry to hear that she is thinking that way, but I think you're right. She has a clear understanding, not just of the role of HBCUs and the work that they do, but the threat that they face as people come to understand that work and come to understand how they help Black Americans do better, especially in places where people are not always rooting for Black Americans. My students are asking the same kinds of questions. Many of them are getting ready to leave college, and so they're thinking about or trying to think about, like, what do I do with all that I learned in this space when I leave this space, and then what do I do to protect this space after the fact? And much of what I talk to them about when I talk to them about what they should do and what they should be thinking about is to remind them that the American government is vast and that we have this federal system in which we have state governments and local governments and other subnational governments working at the same time that we have this national government working. And I try to get them to refocus some of their thinking to these smaller and closer parts of government that are to them that are a bit more easy to change in some instances than the big national government. On the HBCU question, I tell them that we have to fight. We've been fighting for these universities at this point for more than 100 years in some cases. And so it has been scary recently. It'll probably be very scary in the near future, but we have experience with that. And we know how to stay in a fight long enough to make sure that our schools persist.
Fernand, I had the opportunity to speak to one of your classes. I think you have a particularly unique insight on what it's like to teach young people going forward, because Florida, to the best of DeSantis' attempts, Governor DeSantis' attempts, he's been trying to turn Florida into a version of Trump's America, despite what Donald Trump actually thinks of him. What kind of conversations have you had with your students? Obviously, I'm sure you have some students who are very happy that Donald Trump was reelected, but you have to have a large number who probably also think, hey, I don't know that this is a good idea. I don't know that tariffs are good. I'm a queer person. I'm a person of color. Do I have a space? What can I do in this new administration? What are the kinds of questions you're getting from them?
Well, Jason, very similar to those that Dr. Grant just eloquently talked about. I mean, as you said, Florida in many respects is the laboratory for the MAGA movement. And we've seen our public university system under Ron DeSantis, in essence, become decimated. Institutions like New College, which was one of the best public universities in the country, now is basically a propagandistic style right-wing entity. We saw what happened with our flagship university here, the University of Florida, which was in essence taken over by a Republican-style presidency, and former Senator Ben Sasse, he had to be dismissed because of just almost open corruption and graft. But the conversations with my students, you had an opportunity to experience it at the University of Miami. The biggest challenge, Jason, is reminding students who, as you said earlier, have only known Donald Trump for these last 9.5 years, is reminding them that this is not normal. For many of them, what they're seeing and what they've become accustomed to is the idea that this is how politics works in the United States. Right. This abnormality that we've experienced is how it is when it's actually not. Where it becomes difficult and the hardest part is telling them that we will have the guarantees and the liberties and the protections in the future. I can't say that to them anymore, Jason, given how what we've seen Trump has said, what he's campaigned on, and what he's done just in the time he's been president-elect, nominating, as you said, a cabinet that is not only unqualified, it's almost a litmus test and loyalty test to the Republican Party, daring to defy him and putting these clearly unqualified and disqualified people up for these most important positions to run agencies in the most powerful country in the world.
Dr. Grant, you know, this is one of the things that I also find really fascinating. My students are pretty cynical, right? My Morgan State students are often like, they don't think the system is going to work for them. They've never thought the system was going to work for them. And for many of them who are first and second year students, you know, Obama left office when they were kids, right? They don't really, they know that this guy existed. So the idea of representation in government, both phenotypic representation and ideological representation, is very new for them. Do you find that when you try to talk to them about, hey, there are opportunities to still get yourself involved in government, do you think the young people are still interested in the kind of participation that we were taught? Civic participation, you go, you march, and you go vote? Or are other things more appealing to them as they try and figure out what their place will be moving forward?
That's a good question. I think that Howard students are like many college students that we find. We have some of them who are like, okay, I got it. I understand what the book says. Let's do it, right? Like, even if it's broken, we can still try to figure out a way to make this thing work. And then you have other students who are like, no, just throw the whole thing away. Let's destroy it. Let's start from the beginning because this doesn't work. Or let me try to figure out how I can work from the outside because this doesn't work. And so I think that we find the Howard students in this same kind of situation where some of them are understanding how our government works, recognizing that it doesn't really do what it says it will do, or it does something different these days than it used to do, but I want to figure out what I can do to make it better, more efficient, make it work for me. And then we still have those who are dreaming about a different system altogether. We still have those who are thinking about whether it may be possible to live under an economic system that's not capitalism, or those who are thinking about what it might look like in a United States that has a multi-party system instead of a two-party system. And so I think we have both things happening. And I think that we have both things happening are good. I am one who thinks that our systems are flawed, but that we should work to make them better. And I think that these ideas with people pushing from the other side actually do make them better, even if we don't end up on those ideals themselves.
Fernand, a couple of months ago, I had a conversation with a very, very left-wing student of mine who insisted that government does nothing and it's all corrupt. And I had this whole wonderful conversation with him about this thing called the Affordable Care Act, and explained to him how it actually worked, because he's 19 and didn't really understand the process of how millions of people, including people that I knew, used to not have health care. What's a positive story that you can tell your students now? What's something that you can say to your students at University of Miami? Hey, we still have this. We still have this. Historically, we have fought worse things than this in American history and survived. What's the good news that you're able to share with them since the election, if there is any?
Well, look, to the extent that there is good news, I think there is this moment, this generational moment that has been passed, whether they wanted it or not. The future of the democracy, the future of our republic now lies in their hands. The good news is, Jason, We have never had more access to information at any point in American history than right now. These young people are masters of the new technology. They know how to convene. They know how to speak and basically come together if need be at a moment's notice, something that was much more difficult to do in the past. And as long as we still have these protections, as long as we still have these constitutional rights, they know that they have to take advantage of that and protect them. We talked about it just a moment ago. The other thing that's so heartbreaking that I experience in my class, especially with the female students, this idea that they are now the first generation that has lost constitutional rights in their lifetime. And for women in particular, with the loss of Roe v. Wade, that impacts young women who are of reproductive age more than anybody else. So this notion that they understand there is a battle ahead, they have their energy, they have their enthusiasm, they have their ability to connect and access to information and the world's history in their smartphones. That's the positive I keep trying to remind them. Their agency is their voice, their organizational power and convening power. And whether they like it or not, whether they appreciate being dealt this historic hand, they now have to fight for what the founders deeded to us 246 years ago, which is our republic, if we can keep it.
Yeah. Now, the founders weren't deeding it to us, but deeding it to people like us. Thank you all so much for starting off our show tonight. I love talking to other professors, Dr. Kenesha Grant and Fernando Armandi. Thank you so much.